Welcome to the 99 Forever podcast. I'm Eric Friesen, and I'm really excited to be launching my own podcast here on the Oilers Live channel. If you're a regular listener of the Oilers Live podcast and the Heavy Hockey podcast that Michael runs, then you might have heard me on the show as one of his guests, but now I'll be doing my own podcast here, so I want to thank everyone who's listening for checking it out. And before I bring in my first guest, I'm going to quickly explain the name of 99 Forever and give you an idea of what to expect on the show. So this is going to be a largely Oilers-centric podcast. The Edmonton Oilers have been a huge part of my life for over 20 years now, and the reason I'm an Oilers fan is because of my hero, Wayne Gretzky. Although I was born shortly after he was traded to the LA Kings in '88, I would always hear stories about Gretzky and the Oilers' glory days in the '80s growing up from my dad. Learned a lot more about him as I got older and just became an even bigger fan of the Great One. So he's the reason I'm an Oilers fan, and I thought that it would be only fitting that I name my podcast after his iconic number 99. And that also kind of ties into what you can expect on the podcast. My plan is to not just discuss the current state of the team, but I also want to talk to my other guests who I assume will also be diehard Oiler fans and kind of find out more about how they became fans and some of their favorite memories of the team over the years. So with that said, I'll now introduce my first guest ever on the 99 Forever podcast, Canada West broadcaster and online content provider and TSN 1260 host, Brian Swane. Brian, thanks for taking the maiden voyage with me here.
Hey, I'm thrilled to join you, Eric. I know you've been telling me about this podcast has been coming for a long time and looking forward to it, and I'm just genuinely honored that you asked me to be the first guest.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. We've actually been conversing for quite a while. We haven't actually met yet. Hopefully we'll get a chance to in Edmonton next week. But no, it's always been great to have Oilers talk with you and just talk about anything. So I thought you'd be a great guy to have on first. And, I off the top of the show, I kind of outlined what I wanted this podcast to be and kind of talked about how I became an Oilers fan. Like I said, learning about Gretzky and the glory days, even though I wasn't around for it. And, being only 5 hours away also made it convenient that I was always able to travel and see the Oilers play. But before we dive into any Oilers talk today, I wouldn't mind just kind of hearing a little bit from you. What are some of your earliest memories of the team and sort of what was your entry point into fandom?
I think my entry point is just the fact that I was a young kid in Edmonton and sort of came of age, I guess. I mean, my earliest memories would be the very late 80s. But it's not, you didn't have much choice then, to be honest, back then. It was just, it's just kind of like from as far back as I can remember, it was just a part of everything. I mean, my parents, of course, my mom's from Montreal, so she's a huge Montreal Canadiens fan. So, I mean, we always had hockey around my house. I played hockey as a kid. It's the cliche Canadian upbringing, but it was true for me. I mean, it was just hockey was everything. And I know people who are familiar with me know that I'm a very passionate basketball fan and involved with that. But to be honest, I mean, I was probably immersed in hockey 2 or 3 years before I even was aware that basketball existed. And so because of that, it's just the Oilers were just such a huge part of my upbringing. And very fortunate, I guess, to be, and you only realize this now looking back as I've grown up and it's been, coming up on 30 years since the Oilers last won their Stanley Cup. How to be able to experience that as a kid with the incredible amount of success they had and just the incredible level of talent that was on this team. It's quite remarkable. And it's almost, I've equated this. I've told people when I was a kid, when the Oilers lost, I really couldn't process it because they won so often. I likened it to, when you were watching your favorite movie or TV show, the good guys always won. And to me, the Oilers were the good guys. And I couldn't fathom. It was really difficult for me to wrap my head around when they wouldn't win because it's just, it's like a TV show you'd watch. Of course, there's the struggles and it looks like the bad guy has the upper hand, but then ultimately at the end, the good guy comes out on top. And so it's just a huge part of my upbringing, as it was for really, I think, anyone who was lucky enough to grow up in Edmonton at that time.
Yeah, almost like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone not getting the best of the villain in the end of the movie. I guess if you want to tie in another '80s reference to it, but yeah, and I know you're a big basketball guy too, and I'm sure we can talk about basketball some point down the road too. But yeah, so in the early '90s, it must have been a pretty good time for you too, because the Suns were coming on at that time, right? And also the Oilers were still in the final stages of kind of their dynasty run.
Yeah, it's actually, now that you mention it, it's kind of funny because the year I became a big Phoenix Suns fan in the NBA is 92, 93, which is the first year they had Charles Barkley, and the year they made their run to the NBA Finals, which is really the greatest success they've had in my lifetime. And it's funny how that coincides with being the first year ever that the Oilers missed the playoffs. It's like I needed some kind of other outlet to spend my time in April and May. And because, yeah, you're right. I mean, even early 90s, the Oilers were still very competitive. People think back to 1990, but it's quite remarkable that even with the pieces that were moved away every year, and it wasn't just a matter of talent coming off the roster, because they got good players in return. But those teams in 90, 91, and 92, there was a great deal of roster overhaul. And for them to manage to keep that winning culture consistent was quite remarkable. Because if you look at what they did in the playoffs, both in 91 and 92, when they advanced to the conference finals each year, they were the underdogs. You know, they upset Vancouver in 92. 91, I believe, was LA they knocked off in the Smythe Division Finals. I mean, they were winning series where they were the underdog, but that winning culture was still prevalent there. And so, yeah, you're right, that extended into the early 90s with those Oilers teams. And yeah, now that you mention it, there may have been something to do with it all coinciding there in that fateful year of 1993.
Yeah, absolutely. And as they went into that kind of that rough period there in the 90s where they missed the playoffs 4 straight years, which now looking back, we'd probably take a 4-year joke compared to what we've seen the last 13 years. But I sort of came into really watching hockey during the 97 playoffs, and Todd Marchand's goal is something that I can still remember. But at 8 years old, it didn't really, I guess, affect me or make me that invested at that time. I guess it was, I realized it was a big goal to win the series, but I didn't have the scope of realizing like what it meant to Oilers fans. Do you have a favorite memory during maybe the 90s or the 2000s from the Oilers that stands out to you? Sort of a post-dynasty moment.
Oh, there's a ton of them, but I'll go for an easy one. A lot of people remember it. It's from that 97 series against Dallas. Game 3, the incredible comeback from the Oilers down 3-0 with, I want to say it's about 5.5 minutes left in regulation, score 3 goals, then win it in overtime to take the 2-1 series lead. And this is probably the greatest sporting event I've ever been fortunate enough to attend in person, at least as a fan in my life. And the reason we went to that was the Oilers' first home playoff game in 5 years. And I had begged my parents all week and said, it's been 5 years. We got to go. And they finally went. And to put it in context of, I think, how significant of a transcendent moment that was for the Oilers introducing themselves to a new generation of fans, we got tickets just the night before that game. So, I mean, if you can imagine a point in time when there was Oilers playoff tickets available. I mean, they weren't great tickets, and there wasn't a lot to choose from, but they were still available the night before the game. There were a few to choose from, and you couldn't possibly fathom that now. And for me, that game, I think a lot of fans, that game was like a transformative moment for them. That's the first great taste of success they had, and then of course it all kind of leads up to a week and a half later, the famous Marchand goal.
Right, and I think it was Buckberger who got the overtime winner to seal it, if I'm not mistaken. And I believe I've heard stories over the years that there were fans who left the building with 10 minutes to go or 5 minutes to go, and it wasn't a full capacity when overtime started because no one anticipated the comeback late in the game where they tied it.
I'm sure there were, and that's why that's a lesson I think that everyone should learn is you never leave early. It's funny how you hear that in all sports, and some of the great comebacks of all time have happened before of half full arenas or stadiums because everyone gave up, and there's a great lesson. Hey, the Oilers didn't give up that night, so shame on the fans who did.
Yeah, no kidding. But my personal favorite Oilers moment that I can think of just from the last 20 years, I'd say was in 2006 when Hemsky scored the series clinching goal against Manny Legacy and the Red Wings. And it's funny because I remember they showed a shot of Ken Holland up in the press box and the disappointment on his face. And I'm going to get into Holland in a couple minutes too, so it ties in nicely. But uh, that goal, do you remember that one well when he gave the Oilers their first playoff series win in 8 years?
I do a little bit. It's funny, like the memories from the '90s still resonate more with me, and I think it's just has to do with kind of when I was growing up. That's just such a profound part of my youth. That 2006 run, I always enjoy hearing from people like yourself, where that was like the first major run you experienced. You really experienced sort of, I guess, as an adult or close to adulthood, and
Right.
because for me, there's so many memories from that 2006 run that they all kind of blend together that I would honestly be hard pressed to pick one out. And I always enjoy hearing that. And I guess in for someone like yourself, that is probably uh what if that's the number one memory you have from the 2006 run. Do you have a second one?
Yeah, it would probably be the Pisani goal in overtime of Game 5, the
Right.
shorthanded one where he picked it off and went top shelf over Cam Ward. But I was such a Hemsky fan at that time, and he had had a huge breakout year at 22, and it just looked like he was going to turn into the next superstar. He never really quite reached that level, but he was definitely the Oilers' best player for at least 5 years, and that moment just because all through my elementary and high school years, I was in grade 11 at the time when he during that playoff run, but the Oilers were never really in the consideration for going on a deep run. They'd make the playoffs one year and lose to the Stars. They'd miss the next year. They'd get back in the playoffs the next years and lose to the Stars. It was like a kind of a running thing that was going on. And you just looked at Detroit and Colorado, Toronto, Dallas, New Jersey. Like those were the teams that were going to the conference final, it seemed all the time, and or the Stanley Cup final. But Edmonton was never even in anyone's thought for going there. So just to see the team that I devoted so much time to and to following and loving and get to that point, it was incredible. If they would have lost in the next series to the Sharks, it would still be a great memory for me because winning that playoff series just to my generation of Oilers fans who never got to experience the glory days, that was just it was like our Stanley Cup almost, and really they got so close, one game away, even you could say a goal away from the cup. So yeah, 2006 still holds a lot of special memories for me.
In 2006 too, I mean, it's really when you reflect back on it, what they had to do, the run they went on at the end of the season just to even get into the playoffs. It's
Absolutely.
it's really a remarkable story that I think, and I'm sure it's probably the same with you too, as you've grown up. You only come to further to really truly appreciate it to the degree that you probably should over time. And I think especially with as Oilers fans having gone so long now again through such a drought of success that you appreciate how special those moments are. And I think for a lot of people, next time you experience that, you'll savor it that much more for that reason.
Absolutely. I mean, seeing them get back in 2017, 11 years later, that was a special run too. And to think they were so close, one game away from the conference final. And I think Nashville was pretty banged up that year. So, anything could have happened. You win that game 7. I'm not saying they would have beat Pittsburgh in the final. I think the Penguins still were going to win the cup that year, but man, that would have been something. So we'll dive into a little bit of the current hockey talk here with the team. And I mentioned Ken Holland about a minute ago, and I wanted to just get your overall thoughts on his first offseason as GM of the Edmonton Oilers.
I think it's been successful. I mean, I know there haven't been any earth-shaking moves, and I think that disappointed people a lot, whether it was, via a trade or a free agent signing. But I think if you look at the situation he was in, the restrictions he was under with contracts and salaries, I think he's done very well. He's made, I'm really excited to watch because he's made a lot of intriguing moves. We've seen him take approaches that I don't think we've really seen from Oilers, really anyone in his position with the Oilers in the past, and I'm certainly going to be curious to get your thoughts on this, Eric, because I don't think we've really talked about this much yet. But he's reached out to or brought in a lot of players from overseas, professionals that guys that are already in their mid-20s or so that have been playing professionally for a few years, but are rookies to the NHL. And I'm really intrigued why this seems to be kind of where he sees a potential source of talent and perhaps some leadership and just bringing in things that maybe pieces that were missing to the Oilers before, and that this is the direction he's decided to go. Obviously, I think it helps that he's able to get them on contracts that fit under the constraints that the Oilers are under right now. But it's a really interesting approach, and the more I'm learning about some of these European players they brought in, I'm very excited.
Yeah, and Ken Holland has a great history of dealing with European players in Detroit. He built I guess you could call them close to a dynasty. I mean, 4 cups in 11 years is really impressive. Maybe
I think by today's standards, that constitutes a dynasty.
Well, I'll tell you what, if the Oilers win 2 cups in the next 11 years, I'll be thrilled. So,
Exactly.
But yeah, so he's already secured his space in the Hockey Hall of Fame, and I just respect that he's still got the work ethic to go out there and try to add to his legacy at I think he's 63. So he is.
I mean,
the fact that he's not done yet.
Yeah, and he doesn't seem now I'm going to offend anybody who's 63 now, but he doesn't, he has this kind of the way he sees things. He's obviously not beholden to old school thinking, if that makes sense.
Right. And both my parents are 63, and I'm sure if you ask my dad, on some days he feels 50 and other days he feels 70. So it might be one of those ages that's kind of in flux. But no, he signed a 5-year deal, so he's committed to being here and putting in the time to get this team to where it needs to be. And I think they needed a steady hand. They had to bring someone in who had experience at the position. I didn't want a rookie GM. Maybe the next GM who takes over from him will be a rookie once this team is an established winner. But this is the guy you want to get off the ground. And I really like the moves he's made this summer. It's been subtle. He hasn't brought in anyone big, but he got rid of the Lucic contract, which I think was the biggest win of the whole summer. And he brought in a guy who might be able to score 20 goals. So we were talking a couple months ago about having to trade Lucic for and attach a first-round pick to it just to get rid of him. And the fact that we didn't have to give anything else up, plus we got an asset that might be able to help the team, that's just a huge bonus. And he really brought in a lot of guys who are going to compete for bottom 6 spots. I don't know if any of these guys are long-term fits. I think they're more stopgap players until the prospects that are currently in the system are ready to fill those spots. But they might be able to get the job done for a year, 2 years most, and then hopefully we're seeing guys like Benson, McLeod, Maximov come up and start to fill in the spots up front. And of course, there's a ton of guys on the blue line who can help too. But he definitely made a lot of small moves. Does it seem to you like he's sort of making sort of a 2 or 3 year plan here? Like, it seems like, I don't want to call this a transitional year because I still want them to try and compete for the playoffs this season. But do you sort of see it as like this is the first year of like a 2-year plan to kind of make a run for it?
I think if you look at his track record, he probably has this planned out over several years. And of course, I mean, I'm with you. I echo your sentiments entirely. Hopefully they make the playoffs this year, but at the same time, I think you can call this a transitional year. And if they do make the playoffs, I think for a lot of people that would be considered an overwhelming success. I think you also made an excellent point there, Eric, in how some of these players he's brought in are stopgaps. because the young kids are coming, and when they get here, as long as the Oilers continue to develop them properly, the likes of who you mentioned, from the Cooper Marodis to the Yamamotos, et cetera, they're going to be really, but Benson, they're going to be really good. Yeah. And I think, it's ideally maybe the stopgaps you brought in have ingrained themselves so much on this team that now you face tough decisions. And if not, worst case scenario, they have been able to fill that stopgap role, and the kids have taken over. But is now looking at some of these players, are there any of these guys that he's brought in this year that you see as maybe an underrated or underappreciated signing that could be that, let's say one guy is going to break through and be that player who, contributes at a level much higher than is anticipated of them, and does play themselves into a situation where they're indisposable to this team? Who do you think that would be?
Well, as for someone who could go with the team long-term forward, it makes you think, could someone like Nygaard, I believe that's how I've heard it pronounced both ways.
So have I.
Yeah, could he be a guy who maybe has a chance to help this team? He's got blazing speed, and he was second in the Swedish league in goals last year. If you put him on a line with Nugent Hopkins, now you've got an excellent passer in Nuge with two natural shooters on his line. He could have James Neal on the right side. He could have Nygaard. I'll just go with Nygaard because that's how I've heard it more. And Nygaard on the left side. And then you've got perhaps a pretty good second line, actually, which is something the Oilers haven't had in a long time. And then, honestly, you can rotate in and out the right wing spot on the top line with McDavid and Draisaitl. You could start Cassian up there. If Josh Archibald ends up having a hot run where he gets 3 goals in 5 games, maybe he gets a look up there. I think that's going to be a spot where there's really going to be guys coming in and out, but I see Draisaitl and McDavid sticking together for the most part, and that's something that Dave Tippett has already kind of telegraphed to this point, that he really wants to keep those two together.
You know what? I think maybe we need to, because we're not sure the pronunciation of his name, maybe we need to give Nygaard a nickname, maybe like, I don't know, the Stockholm Speedster or something like that we can just all embrace. But I think you hit it on the head there, mentioning, pairing him up with Nugent Hopkins, and if he establishes chemistry with him, how significant is that, just given the comments that Nugent Hopkins has kind of made in the last week or so?
Yeah. I think this is going to be another really good year for Nuge, and they have to find him some guys to play with. Does Chason get a look there too? I've seen, I think it was, they put the lines out for camp today. Multiple guys did, from TSN 1260 and from Ched. And I think Gagne was even up in a top 6, getting a spot with Group A. Is that right?
I believe I did hear that too. And I don't have a problem with that. I like what Gagne brings. I could see that working. I think for me, more than anything, I would like to see some consistency and stability, because I feel for Nugent Hopkins. Everything that he kind of said, and you might have had to read between the lines with his comments this week, but he's bang on.
And you know what else? That guy has seen more dysfunction than anyone. People always talk about, you have to keep Draisaitl happy, you have to keep McDavid happy to want them to be here long term. I think you have to keep Nugent Hopkins happy. He's 8 years in now. He's the most senior player on the team, which is hard to believe because it seems like he's still one of the youngest guys on the team because he looks so youthful. But he's been around 8 years now. He's a veteran in this league. He's an assistant captain on the team, and he's up for free agency in 2 years, and I really think that they need to keep him happy and show him that they can be a competitive team if they want him to re-sign. And this is going to be incumbent on the Oilers to keep their core together and convince him that we're building a winning program here, and a team that can be successful for years to come, because he's hitting those prime years now, and he's been up and down with injuries, and I think for a while some of the creativity went out of his game when he was trying to be more of a two-way player, allowing guys like Eberle and Hall back in the day to, which I shouldn't even say back in the day. They've only been gone for a couple of years, but it seems like a while ago now, just because the core has changed. But yeah, it's for me. I think that they really need to build something around him and show him that they can be competitive.
Oh, without question. And what's interesting is that you mentioned there is people talk about you want to keep McDavid happy, you want to keep just Draisaitl happy. I think it's a credit, and it just speaks to the character of Nugent Hopkins. And no one ever says you want to keep him happy, because he never comes across as someone who's not happy. He's always fully all in, 110%. He's completely invested. You never ever have to question his dedication. Yep. And I think that's why that people never say, "Oh, we need to keep Nugent Hopkins happy," because you're just not worried about him. And in one hand, that kind of almost concerns you, because it's almost like you take it for granted, if that makes sense.
Well, the first time I ever heard even an ounce of frustration in his voice after all these years was in his season exit interview last April. And he just, to me, it came across as that he was really frustrated to be missing the playoffs for the 7th time in 8 years. And, this is a guy who has been so loyal to this team and to the city of Edmonton. And I really think that they need to give him the type of line mates he needs, the type of consistent line mates, whether it be Chason, whether it be Neal, Tyler Benson. I'd actually love to see Tyler Benson and him together at some point. But let's just kind of actually shift gears a little bit to his potential line mate here, James Neal. I mentioned the Lucic trade a little earlier. What do you think are reasonable expectations for Neal this year? Do you see him bouncing back and having a big year, or should we kind of be lowering our expectations for him a bit?
I think it's reasonable to think he'll bounce back. I mean, if you look at his track record, what was it, like 10 or 11 years before this? Yeah, that he had at least 20 goals, and so I'm willing to take those percentages. One out of 11 or 12 years being an off year. I think just based on that, I wouldn't say, I bet the farm on him having a bounce back year, but why not? And especially, just being in new surroundings, and we'll see what line he ends up on consistently, but a chance to play potentially with some incredibly gifted playmakers. I guess my response is simply, why not?
And if you think about it, this is the first off season in 3 years where he's really had a chance to put in a full summer of work, because in 2017 he went to the final with Nashville, and in 2018 he went to the final with Vegas. So because of those 2 runs, he really didn't have a lot of time to train and get into the proper shape that he needs for the season. And then he comes to Calgary, where he's loses his spot in the top 6 early in the year. He gets hurt and misses 5 weeks. And then when he's coming back, he's trying to solidify a spot in the lineup, and he's just having such a hard time getting in there that it seemed like it wasn't going to work from the start. Now you might think this is a bit of time for him to be rejuvenated. He comes to a new team where he's going to absolutely get a spot in the top 6. And I never want to give Calgary, anything over the Oilers, but I have to say their forward core is deeper, even though I think the Oilers' top talents are superior to the Flames' top talents. But this is going to be a really good opportunity for him. He knows he's going to play in the top 6. He's probably going to get a lot of power play time. So I'm excited to see where he goes from here.
And I'll say this, I think the likelihood of him bouncing back and rediscovering his prime form, or maybe not necessarily prime form, but something more closely resembling what he did in his most productive seasons, I think the odds of Neal doing that are much greater than the odds of the guy he was traded for doing that.
Absolutely. And, speaking of having a full off season to heal up, we turn to Connor McDavid, who's been a big story at camp right now, and they wonder, or fans are wondering, is he going to be ready for the start of the season? Is he going to miss some time? But all signs point to that he should be ready for the start. They're saying all the positive things. He's and being involved in practice. And to me, it's not really a big deal if he doesn't play a lot of exhibition games. He only plays 3 or 4 a year anyway. So the fact that he might miss all 7 this year, I don't think it's a big deal. Are you at all concerned about McDavid being less than 100% at the start of the season?
Not really. I mean, I know the Oilers. Maybe I shouldn't, but I have full confidence actually in at least this regime to manage him correctly, to ensure that he is as close to 100% as he possibly could be on opening night. I mean, I know there's kind of been still some mystery surrounding his injury and how far along in the recovery process he is, and this and that. But all that aside, I do actually have faith in this management and coaching staff to do whatever they have to do to ensure he's most healthy once the season gets going. And I don't think it's going to be much, if any, of a detriment to him if he doesn't get in, 2 or 3 games to, quote unquote, knock the rust off and all that. I expect him to hit the ground running, so to speak.
Yeah, and he's been skating for a couple months now, so it's not like he is really behind anything, and he's still participating in drills. I don't think anyone's going to cream him out there, but he's taking part in full contact drills in practice. So yeah, his teammates might let off of him a little bit. They don't need for him to wear a red jersey or a special jersey for people to realize who he is. It's pretty easy to find the fastest guy out there, but at the same time, you want to make sure that he's tested and kind of isn't going to get hit once early and then he's out for another month. So it's better that they kind of slow play this, I think, and make sure that he's 100% ready to go. And hopefully that lines up perfectly with October 2nd.
Yeah, and October 2nd, we're still, I guess we're still about 3 weeks off from that. So I think there's plenty of reason to be optimistic that will be the case.
Absolutely. So we talked a minute ago about James Neal and how we're hoping that he'll bounce back. I wrote in one of my recent articles at the Hockey Writers that I think he's going to get 23 goals this year. And that would actually be a huge boost for the Oilers, considering that if he's replacing Lucic's 6 goals, then they got a major win there. But at the same time, Draisaitl might come down 10, McDavid might go up 5 to 10. So it'll probably all balance out, but they should get a nice boost from Neal regardless. The Hockey News recently released their predictions for all the teams' point totals. And I was kind of looking through the Oilers notifications, and I know you had a chance to look at what their projected point totals were too. And I just wanted to know if anything stood out to you from that, or if anything jumped off the page that was completely wrong or right on the mark.
To be honest, there's a few guys that I think they're coming in lower than I thought they would. Of course, Connor McDavid was at 121, Leon Draisaitl at 100, I think. Yeah. I mean, again, and it's funny because you and I talk so much about the race to get to two players on the same team having 100 and having 100 points in the season and how rare that was in this day and age. I know you did a great article about that back in the spring on the Hockey Writers. So to go back to back with 2 100-point scorers would be pretty remarkable. But just looking at each individually, if they're healthy, I don't see why they wouldn't hit that mark. I think one that jumps out for me as being much lower than certainly than I would hope. And Darnell Nurse at 34, I'm hoping, and we'll see what kind of role he ends up being employed in by the Oilers, and how much time he gets on the power play will play a big part in that. But I certainly was hoping for more than 34 points in him. And then the one that's really kind of like a real kick in the gut is Alex Chason at 29. So they're really predicting he comes. He's like a meteor with how he comes crashing back to earth. If that's the case, I'd like to think. Now, I'm not expecting him to hit the numbers of last year. I don't think anybody is. And if he does, what a massive bonus that would be again. But boy, I certainly hope 29. And the other one that's interesting to me, and I'd be curious to get your take on this because you're projecting Neal to get 23 goals, I believe, is what you had in your article.
Yep.
Yeah, and he's at 49 points. So from the Hockey News, which probably lines up with about a 25-30 assist season, and to go with 23 goals, if we're using that as the template. So that's an interesting one. Obviously, the Hockey News now does feel that he's going to bounce back a little bit too.
Yeah, and it's really hard to predict James Neal because he could have 55 points or he could have 35 points. It's so hard to say, but I think that his goals and assist totals won't be too far apart. He might have I could see if it's 49, maybe is it 23 goals and 26 assists or something like that. But the ones that really stood out to me were Darnell Nurse and Oscar Klefbom. Like, if Klefbom's health, like they must be assuming that Klefbom isn't going to play a full season here because there's no way a healthy Oscar Klefbom's going to get 27 points. I think he's going to be much closer to 40. His career high is 38. Darnell Nurse had 41 last year. So I could see Nurse maybe coming down a few points if they're using Klefbom and, let's say, Joel Pearson, who might be his D partner this year, as the offensive duo, and then using Adam Larson and Darnell Nurse as the defensive conscience. But really, I don't think both of them will be sub 35 guys. Like, you'd think that Klefbom's at least going to be 10 points higher than they have him, wouldn't you?
You got to think that at least one of those two would be.
Because Nurse will lose some power play time, right? He had a lot of power play time last year when Klefbom was injured, so he might not get all that. At the same time, Nurse is in a contract year, and he just saw Josh Morrissey get a 6-year deal for over $6 million a year. So, to me, I think he's still going to be really pushing hard and challenging Klefbom for that first power play spot.
Right, and I'll ask you this: should he get less power play time? Because I thought he was really. Now I know he was kind of used in that situation almost by necessity, but I think we saw some real great strides from him in that role, and I think that he has great potential to really become someone who flourishes in that role. So, I mean, that's a question I would throw out there: is should he have his power play time diminish?
And at the same time, you can't think too far ahead. But if you pay Nurse to be, let's say you pay him a 7-year deal, 6-year deal, something like that, to be your number one power play guy, well, what happens a year, 2 years, 3 years from now when Bouchard arrives and when Broberg arrives and Sam Marukov is here? I think that Evan Bouchard is eventually going to be the Oilers' number one power play unit quarterback. And I just think I love Darnell Nurse. I've met him. He's a great guy, and love watching him play. He does make some mistakes at times, but all young defensemen do. He's just still only in his 5th season. But really, if they're going to pay him to be that number one power play defenseman, and then you end up taking that role away from him 2 years from now when Bouchard absolutely seizes it, does that seem like you're now have another overpay on the roster because Darnell Nurse isn't being used in the role that he was paid to do 2 years earlier?
Right, and I'll be honest, Eric, that's not really something that I had thought too much about. Hopefully, Ken Holland has. I'm sure he has. We talked about over previously how he's probably got this mapped out over years. But that is a tremendous point. That's a great thing to consider. I'll ask you this then: is there anything in particular you need to see out of Bouchard this season, wherever he may end up playing?
Yeah.
What does he need to show you to give you confidence that he will be, that they can go all in on him and say, yeah, he's going to be this guy for us in whatever it may be, 2, 3, 4 years?
Well, I mean, he's got the obvious things. He's able to get shots through, unlike any other defenseman currently on the team or in the prospect pool. That slap shot is world class. He moves the puck so well. I just can't wait to see him sending McDavid on those stretch breakaway passes for the next decade or longer. So he's got that in his toolbox. He also thinks the game really well, but I want to see a little more urgency. In the defensive zone, he's got to learn how to check a little better, which will come with time. He doesn't turn 20 years old until early October. So he's still such a young player. But just because he made the team last year, I don't think he's a lock to get it this year. And when you look at the guy, like he just has all the tools. It's just a matter of can he tighten up a little bit defensively and increase that pace of play a little bit. I don't think he's overly slow, but he's not a speedster either. He doesn't lose a lot of races, but it's just when he's carrying the puck up the ice, it looks a little nonchalant. So people tend to think that means that he's not a great skater. But you know what? If it ends up being him and Broberg as the Oilers' top two defensemen one day, you're going to have Broberg as the guy who can skate the puck end to end, Bobby Orr style, and then you'll have Bouchard is the guy who can make the stretch passes to send the Oilers wingers on breakaway chances. So I think they're going to have two really deadly weapons there down the road.
Yeah, I certainly could see that being the case, and hopefully that is the case. I do got to ask you this one, Eric, about now you with the Oilers point projections. I'm not sure if the Hockey News goes in further, based on the tweet that they put out. They just have the top 10. And Granlund at 22 is 10th on the team. Yeah. Someone who is not on this list that really jumped out to me, and I'm curious, is there anyone that did not appear on this list that jumped out to you? Because I bet we're thinking the same guy.
Well, Nygaard is one, and I was maybe they're not expecting him to even make the team just because it's a European player and they want to base most of them on players with already who have NHL experience. I don't know. Were you surprised? Maybe Tyler Benson,
Cassian, actually.
Cassian. Okay.
Yeah, and I wonder if that just is them projecting where he's going to end up in the lineup, and that could very well be the case. But I know a lot of people are hoping that he can, and of course, like I say, it depends on where he'll play, but he can come close to at least replicating his contributions from last season.
And he started on, he's projected to start on the first line, and who knows, a lot of things can change over the next couple of weeks. But you have to think, even if he gets no power play time, just playing even strength minutes with McDavid and Draisaitl, he's going to pick up at least, you'd think, 25 to 30 points.
Well, you play with those guys for any significant amount of time, you're going to get 22 points by accident.
Yeah, and we've talked about contract years too, and Dave Tippett mentioned it in his presser today down at Rogers Place that if I was a guy like Cassian and I had the opportunity to play with those guys, I'd come to work every day really prepared to have a great year when you're coming into a contract year. So if he wants to get another deal with the Oilers, or if they end up letting him go and he signs somewhere else, how he performs this year could mean major dollars for Zach.
Yeah, I mean, that's another fact to consider too. So yeah, to be honest, that was the first name on that list that jumped out to me that, there's another one you mentioned. I believe you mentioned Benson there. I mean, that's another one. I mean, with just 10 guys scoring 22 points, I would like to think that they're off base on that. I would like to think that the 10th highest scorer on this team this year will have more than 22 points.
Right. And honestly, I mentioned this in another post I had recently that until the Oilers have continued success, and this isn't even just a Toronto media thing where I know they get a lot of flack for how they talk about Edmonton and the Oilers, but until the Oilers have continued success, they're going to be underrated and undervalued around the league. And people are always going to think less of this team until they prove something. And then once you do start to prove something, sometimes people overrate you because, look, the Oilers made one good playoff run in 2017, and a lot of pundits had them winning the Stanley Cup the next year. So they base it, I think, a lot on how your track record is. And until the Oilers can be consecutive playoff teams and show that they're a quality hockey club, they're going to still think lesser of the team's players. I think that's just how it is.
You're probably right. And I mean, here's hoping that they prove them wrong.
Yep. And we'll just wrap up with this kind of on a lighter note, but about a month ago, the Oilers' new navy blue alternate jersey was leaked online, and it was officially unveiled yesterday. So I just wanted to get your take. I don't know if you're a big jersey guy or not. I'm a jersey collector, and especially Oilers jerseys. I do have some NBA and NFL and CFL ones too, but the Oilers are my main jerseys that I obviously collect, and I can't wait to get the new one. A lot of people didn't like it at first. I would say they had about a 30% approval rating in August, but with the release of the nicer pictures and video yesterday, it seems like that might be closer to 75% of the Oilers fan base is on board with them. I just wanted to get your quick take on what you think of them, and is it a big deal to you at all?
Oh, it is. This is a dangerous topic. I'll have to be very careful to keep myself on a short leash because maybe sometime in the future we could talk. We could
Twitter
talk
mentions
jerseys for hours.
Okay, we'll do
I'm
that.
not a big collector, but the designs. I mean, I'm very passionate about it. I'm passionate about the design, both from just the perspective of how teams, the thought process that goes into the designs, and how it sort of mirrors current trends, and all those things really fascinate me. As for this jersey, I've kind of been up and down on it, but I'll say this much: now actually seeing it, the actual real jersey, not some mock-up or a kind of a graphic of it, and actually seeing somebody wear it. You know what? It's not that bad. It's not what I'm always going to be bit disappointed by it because it's not what I was hoping for with their third.
Right.
But it's just taken in its own context. It's not that bad at all. And I think you're right. I mean, it was getting, and you can never judge too much by social media because there's always going to be the angry masses are always going to make their voice heard louder than everybody else. But there did seem to be some backlash to it initially when it first kind of leaked during the summer. But I agree with you now. I'm seeing a lot more positive response to it. I know that friends I've talked to really like it. A lot of people saying they're planning on buying it. So I don't mind it, and it's a really interesting read too. I'm sure you've probably seen it, Eric, on the Oilers website. They describe a lot of what goes into the design process. And
I did watch that.
Yeah, and how they're really going for the minimalistic look, and how that's kind of keeping with current trends, and just really fascinating stuff. If anybody's like me and that finds that interesting, the Oilers do a great job on their website breaking down. Obviously, you can tell they put a lot of a lot of careful thought and process into what comes out. And hey, you know what? It really doesn't matter what they're wearing as long as they're winning, right?
That's what I said. Yeah, and you know what? Honestly, like I think that it's good that they went back to having a blue jersey. They needed to get back to their roots, and even though that this isn't the blue that everyone might have been hoping for, it's still it brings back to me the Oilers that I grew up with, the navy blue, and I kind of like that aspect. But at the same time, I think we all know that what goes around comes around. So the royal blue leaves for a few years, it comes back, it goes away, it comes back. It just always has a way of eventually becoming the Oilers' home set again. And I'm fairly confident that whether it's when the Adidas jersey deal ends and a new manufacturer comes in, or whether they just decide a couple years from now to rebrand, that we will eventually see the original royal blue and orange jerseys come back. So it's never here long. It'll be one of those cool jerseys that 20 years from now you'll be able to look back in the back of your closet that you picked up. But eventually the classic ones will eventually come back, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it's really kind of fascinating, the cyclical nature of jerseys. I mean, the Vancouver Canucks are just one team. You look at the jersey they had now, of course, I think that was introduced in the 70s, and that jersey would have been considered like probably hideous by 90s standards. Now it's now it gets back in and everybody loves it, and so yeah, you know me, Eric, I'm just waiting for the McFarland jersey to come back in.
Yeah, and it's like you said, the minimalistic kind of style really goes with the times. In the 90s, everyone was trying to do these really over-the-top kind of jerseys. Like you look at some of the third jerseys and even home and away sets that teams had throughout the 90s and early 2000s, they were pretty out there. But I always liked the McFarland one. I know you said that kind of kidding, but no,
that's total sincerity.
That's sincerity. No, I loved that one. I was like 12 years old when it came out, and I thought it was the coolest thing. I couldn't wait to ask for it for Christmas. So, yeah, no, this is a cool one too. We'll wrap up here, Brian. I just wanted to quickly ask you: is there anything you have going on that you wanted to tell people about? What you're up to and coming up this fall, and also where can people follow you on social media?
They can follow me at Brian Swane on Twitter, and I guess one thing, and be excited to share with people, is we just started my own podcast with through Canada West. Well, I shouldn't say it's my own, but it's Canada West, and I'm hosting it. Canada West is having its this is the 100th anniversary of the first Western Championship in Canadian university sport, and this year, to celebrate that, Canada West has launched its Hall of Fame. There's 100 inductees being inducted over the course of the next several months. There's one being announced every weekday, and it's of course across all the sports. And I'm hosting a webcast, which you can find on the Canada West website, canadawest.org. We'll be talking to some of these inductees every week, and you know, of course, obviously, anyone who's listening to this is going to be a big hockey fan, and there are going to be some really big names in the hockey world that are going to be announced coming down the line for the Canada West Hall of Fame, and I think a lot of the names that people might be surprised that they got their start in university hockey. So. That would be something I really hope people will tune into, because I'm fortunate enough to be talking to so many people who really truly are living legends in Canadian sport.
Well, Brian, I can't wait to check that out. And once again, thank you so much for joining me. Hopefully, I'll have you back on the podcast again sometime soon.
Oh, I can't wait. Hey, we got to do a Jersey episode sometime.
Yes, I can't wait to do that. It's always good to find another person who wants to talk about that with me. So once again, I also just want to thank everyone for listening to the first episode. Hopefully you'll be back, and we can really grow this thing on the Oilers Live channel. I really appreciate the opportunity to start my own podcast here, and I couldn't ask for a better first guest. So thank you very much. So for Brian Swane, I'm Eric Friesen. This has been the 99 Forever podcast. We're out.